So Rory, I'll let you talk.
Hello, my name's Rory. I work at Starling Bank with Hessie. I'm an ex-Makers Academy graduate. Well, no, I was a Makers Academy graduate. I graduated here in December, and I've been working at Starling Bank for about 5 months now.
I'm still David Morgantini. Still work for Tez.
I'm Hessie. I head of people operations at Starling Bank, so I work with Rory.
Hi, I'm Frances. I work at The Economist as the HR business partner for digital.
And I'm Gary, you just heard me talk.
Brill. Okay, I'm aware that we've heard from a couple of sort of technical people about kind of growing talent, but Frances and Hessie, I was wondering if you could share your thoughts and perspectives from a HR team member. Frances, do you mind kicking us off?
So I suppose specifically working with makers around some of that, a big part of it has been partnering, as you said, really, really closely with the digital team and the different practices. So it's not just engineering, it's across a number of different ones for me. And I think it is really important to understand that people are different shapes and sizes and will learn at different paces. And so to have tools that are quite flexible around that and are also very much you're engaging with your teams to create them so that they feel ownership of it. I have joined organisations sometimes when they try and enforce a toolkit on teams or certain development plans, and it really doesn't work because the teams don't buy in and it doesn't mean anything to them. So I think for me that's a really big part of when you're helping people to grow their own careers, that they're very much involved in it, and you're helping them to be empowered to take it forward, because sometimes there's a bit of abdication of like, oh, it's employee led, so just go off and do it, but they need the support and the toolkits around that from people.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think, David, you spoke quite a lot about the kind of retention factor of people want to grow and develop. And we talk about this in the context of juniors, and it comes up a lot in the literature around kind of millennials. But in actual fact, I think the truth is that we're all people, and we'd all like for somebody to be actually paying attention to us and what we want and where we want to be going and how we want to be developing. And something that's very important to me is, I think, from a kind of learning and development HR perspective, we talk a lot about the 70-20-10 model of learning, where 10 is the kind of really formal piece. And actually the 70% of it, the bulk of it, is what you learn by doing. So we've kind of taken that to heart in the business, and we rotate people across teams on an extremely regular basis, largely, and it's largely self-driven. It's wherever there's a business need, but equally it's in line with people's kind of aspirations and experience and interests. Because we found that that's how people really learn things, but it's also it keeps it interesting, because you've always got the opportunity to try something new.
Rory, do you mind sharing from a perspective of someone who's quite junior, and you've obviously recently done the Makers course, how you've found kind of the growth and where you see your career going in the next couple of years?
Starling Bank, I don't know, I mean, obviously every company has their own way they help new software developers grow, and the stages they take in their first few months in the company. What I've been doing at Starling Bank is actually rotating through. I'm in my third department now, so I started in the test area, which gave me a great exposure to our code base and our apps. I then moved into SRE, which was very helpful in terms of learning about the architecture of the systems. I'm now working in the platform area, which is Java development backend. I've actually found that to be really useful, really good to find out more about what I actually engage with, find more interesting. Personally, it's backend stuff at the moment, especially. One thing I really want to do is just focus on getting really good technical software craftsmanship in the next couple of years. I guess, yeah, just thinking about the next 6 months, that's where I want to be focusing on. Next couple of years, I know I'm going to have to broaden out, be able to put systems together, larger processes, rather than just much more limited, smaller scale sort of things. Yeah, hard to think of the detail of where I'm going to be in 2 years' time at the moment. I can see much more clearly the next sort of 6 months.
I had a question for many of you around assessment of new potential hires and how you can try and perhaps measure the trajectory of someone's learning and potential. Do you have particular structures or assessment tools in place that you use to measure that?
I just spent 30 minutes talking about it. So, I mean, obviously, when we start a new engineer, makers or otherwise, we do an assessment right off the bat using the tool that we've built, and that actually is very valuable to us because it kind of what we see when we do that is we get a view of the areas that they need to grow because they aren't at TES. They have never worked at TES before, so because people will know Node.js, but they won't necessarily know the libraries like Express or MongoDB or whatever, right? There might be stuff they haven't learned, so it's quite valuable for us to be able to view. And what I kind of do as well, and it's maybe a little bit cold-blooded, but it's kind of you say these. If there are a set of objectives, and usually we come up with about 6 or so. That it's like if in 6 months you don't have these, then you're probably not going to work out here at TES. And that's something that's also important because you can't have a culture if you hire somebody that's not very good and they come in and you don't deal with it. And obviously you try to deal with it by helping them grow, but at the same time, if they're not growing, then you need to move them on. And so that's really important for me. So having that initial assessment and the view of where they start is really important for us.
Yeah, virtually very similar. So when I mentioned during the talk that we have kind of that 18-month expectation period, they will progress from junior engineer to senior engineer. As David just said, we take a similar view that if within that 18 months we haven't given them enough support and experience to pick up some of those things, we're not sure it's going to work out for life as a software engineer. We're happy to say that nobody gets to that 18-month period. It is way before that, certainly with makers, it's within a year. But we believe that we've given them enough support and development within that first year to learn everything, as David said, about what it is at CTM that we look for. During the hiring stage, we take the approach that we kind of do. We do some kind of behavioral assessment and kind of some questions we ask them about how they learn and what they're interested in to kind of gauge their passion. And then we do a technical test, which is a formality, but it's a real pairing exercise where we get the greatest insight during a face-to-face, where we give them some tests and one simple function, and we just look for how articulate they are about the problem, how much they break it down, and what the rapport is with the person they're working with. And we don't focus so much on the output of that it's more about how they approach the problem and how they talk about it. It's the greatest insight to whether or not we think they're going to be a success.
Yeah, so similarly, we are less established as a business. We don't have as an established a framework of what we're assessing or looking for in terms of skills, as some of the people we've heard from today. But what we have found very much in the business, generally with juniors and more widely, is the people that do really well at Starling are the people that are actually really interested in what we're doing. I mean, we've built a bank from scratch, and we're all kind of the target market. So people that are quite excited about that and want to roll their sleeves up, learn new things, and take ownership are the people that do very well. So that's what we're kind of looking for in the assessment, and especially when we're talking about kind of whether it's early careers or whether it's someone that's done a career change and is new to coding, for example. What we're looking for is very much attitude rather than skill. So yeah, we did as part of the kind of interview process, we did have a technical challenge. But actually the majority of the assessment is based on, is this somebody that's going to kind of have the attitude to learning that the rest of us do, have the attitude to kind of working in a collaborative way, and be very happy with the level of kind of flexibility that comes with startup life. So we're looking very much more for that attitude, because actually we don't have a kind of fixed framework in place of where your career is going to go, and it is very self-driven. So for example, our other Makers grad joined us end of September. She's just done about 5 weeks in our Android team because she's really keen on mobile. She's now thinking she might go over to iOS. But she's already thinking, actually, I want to try a few different things, but then I might come back to Android. So a very, very different path than the one that Rory's been on. So we don't have quite as fixed a kind of career journey, if you like. So we don't have quite as fixed a framework of what we're looking for, but it's very much more about attitude than skill. And I think somebody that's kind of bringing interesting experience, even if it's not a formal kind of computer science background, actually that's really valuable as well.
Sorry, one other thing I think this, bringing it back to just talking about Makers Academy, one thing that we do, so we don't do a technical test for Makers Academy grads because they've just spent 16 weeks practicing doing technical tests. So I find that to be a lot less valuable. What we actually do is, because they have the time, we bring them into the office for a day, which I find to be very valuable. So we actually have next week, we have four Makers graduates coming into our office. They're going to be pairing with the engineers, actually working with them. And what that gives us, which is a lot more interesting in a technical test, is a recognition of what their potential is. Because what we're really hiring, when we're looking at Makers graduates, is potential. Are you going to be able to learn over the next 12 to 18 months the things we need you to do to become a valued member of this team? And sitting with an engineer working on production code blows their minds. They all go home absolutely exhausted. I talked to one of mine from a few years back, and she was like, my God, I was at 3 o'clock, and I was like, can I just go home? Because it's pretty exhausting, especially you have no idea what the technology is. But it does give us a heck of a lot more insight into the Makers graduates than we would if we were to do the standard interview process that, unfortunately, due to time, you have to do with most engineers.
I think what I found as well when bringing makers on board was that for me, it's so I've worked with makers for 4 years at different organisations. It was sometimes a bit of a sell with the managers to try and bring the makers on board. So there was a lot around it's going to create lag and don't know if it's going to work that well. So part of what we did was come up with expectations, so a lot more flexible, as you say. So we had behaviours and then we had expectations of where we'd expect to see them on 3, 6, 9 and 12 months, so that the managers weren't expecting someone that was really experienced. So they obviously knew that, but there was parts where sometimes they'd give feedback and say, well, they're not doing this sort of stuff yet. And it's like, well, it's not completely fair to be expecting that of them at that stage. So it's sort of setting expectations on both sides. And at my last organisation, we actually had a really exceptional maker who was, we hired 3 at the same time, and she just did everything twice as fast as everyone else. But that wasn't necessarily the expectation that everyone should have. So it was quite useful to have something more flexible, because it didn't mean that the others were doing a bad job. They were doing really well. It's just that she was just flying through and able to pick stuff up faster.
Thank you. I'd like to open it up to the audience now, and what I'll do is I'll grab a question and then I'll repeat it so that it can be heard. And then if it's for someone in particular on the panel, then please let me know.
Thanks. So, well, basically, I'm going through the recruiting process at the moment, and I think what I found, I joined a new company, identified there were quite a few juniors, especially in the front end team. So it was like a bit of a lack of leadership. So I guess the kind of direction we're going now is to bring in a more senior junior person. I guess without promoting in-house, how does that kind of affect the morale of the team? How do you deal with that? To say you're bringing in someone senior to lead the team. The team are brilliant in terms of they want someone to lead, but how do you kind of deal with that in terms of team morale, I guess?
Who would like to take that one? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's something that we kind of face semi-regularly. So as I pointed out, that we sometimes it's necessary for us to bring in at a senior level because it's a difficult skill to hire for. For me, it's about kind of demonstrating back to the team what it is that we're bringing in and why we're bringing it in and what was missing. So it means the expectation on that more senior person coming in is clearly set. And I think it's demonstrating to the team where they are and where they can be with the right leadership. One of the processes we do internally is we in part of our quarterly review, we don't just kind of look at who's ready for promotion or who's moving now. We look at where they are 3, 6, 9 months. So the benefit to us is that we can kind of make sure we're providing the right resources and attention to people who might be progressing. But it also means that those individuals that might be asking you, why aren't I ready for this promotion? You have a much better chance to sit down with them and ahead of time explain, you're not there now. We're tracking you at kind of 6 months being ready there or 9 months being ready there. And with that extra support, that person you're bringing in, you're providing them a demonstration of what those behaviours look like. Rather than you just kind of saying, we want you to become more senior in 9 months. You're saying, we think you're tracking in the right direction to do that. And by bringing these skills in, you'll see firsthand what those look like.
Yeah, David, and then maybe Rory as well. It'd be interesting to hear from your perspective as well.
Sorry, can I hear the question again? Sorry, I thought it was related to senior developers. So my experience has actually been, I don't have experience of senior developers coming into the team whilst I'm in it. There's a fairly well established set of, there's some very, very good developers at Starling, and I don't actually have experience of that, so I can't really comment on it, I'm afraid. I'm going to pass back.
So my feeling on that one would be you need to involve your junior members in the hiring process. They need to be bought into the person that they're going to be bringing in to mentor them. And I think that the steer that you need to give them in their interviews is they need to come out of that interview saying, this person can teach me something. If they can hire somebody that does that and they say yes, then you won't have any problems because they'll be excited to have this person come and join their team.
Fab. Any more questions from the audience?
Hi, this is mainly for the guys talking about the skills matrix, I guess. We are a software agency. We work for government clients. So all of our projects that we do are of different technology or different skill sets required. So I wonder what your thoughts are on kind of what the matrix would look like where we're trying to hire and nurture people like across a very radically different skill sets in the dev team.
Yeah, so we've taken exactly that approach. So as I mentioned, we kind of have front end and back end teams, and within our back end teams, it's split between .NET Core and Node. So rather, we've tried to actively stay away from different skills matrix that work to just one skill set, because we're pigeonholing people, we're not giving them a chance to expand. So instead, we've kind of looked at a macro level, what are the things within software craftsmanship or what are the behaviors that are relevant. So we might call out key patterns of things that we want them to have an understanding of. Or we talk about things like we want them to make sure that their code is self-documenting, their code is readable. And we focus on the other areas. So the things that fit in around just coding, around continuous integration, test-driven development, pairing, what matters to us. For a senior level for us, we take DevOps and very seriously. We have a philosophy internally called build it, run it, own it, where if a team is responsible for a microservice, that as well as bringing that into production, they're then responsible for supporting it. That philosophy with it kind of naturally leans itself to different levels of maturity. So depending on the responsibility of the individual, we kind of add more responsibility to the seniors. So as well as just kind of being great at writing the software, they have to be great at supporting the software and how they go about triaging the issue, making sure that it goes from development into production seamlessly as some of the extra things we add. We found that kind of within the teams themselves, stuff around whether or not they understand the nuances and the specifics of a language are actually niche subjects, and we don't really focus on too much. That stuff kind of naturally comes out. The stuff that's been harder to come out is that leadership and maturity in software, which is what we focus on instead.
We take a slightly different tact. Actually the other company that I know that does something similar, they have said 300 engineers, and they have 12 different matrices for their employees. We have 4. The most recent one that I've just created is a junior engineer one. Every Makers graduate would already have filled in most of the things, but this is so that if other people in the business want to be able to become an engineer, I basically say, go away, do this. When you've done this and you've done our technical tests, then come talk to me, and then we can bring you in and support you the rest of the way. But the other ones we have is a Node.js template, a Drupal template, and a principal engineer template. And between the Node.js and the Drupal, there's probably 85% shared skills, maybe even higher. And so basically, like you'll have a set of technical skills, like working knowledge of Node.js, and then of course the other side is working knowledge of PHP, right? So those are going to differ, but all of the soft skills, all of the other things are identical between the two, all the engagement and leadership and so on, aside from the fact that Drupal doesn't use microservices, so they don't need to talk about that kind of stuff. The principal engineer one is one I've just recently created, is also one that basically what it does is it kind of squishes down almost all the skills to say, okay, well, if you want to be a principal engineer, which is a line manager, except I don't like management, so I don't call them line managers. It pushes it down, because essentially to be a principal engineer at just even the base level principal engineer, basically having almost no skills in principal engineering, you still need to be higher than just at a node engineer skill. So we kind of do that, and because of the tool we've built, it's actually relatively easy to manage across having same skills across multiple templates. And when I say relatively easy, I mean it's a pain in the ass, but I can build the UX to make that better, and that's probably going to be one of my focuses over the next 6 months before our next evaluation phase.
Yeah, Jill.
Hello. So we're looking to expand rapidly in the near future. And one of the current worries with our developers in-house at the moment is that our culture is somehow going to be lost or changed. Is it possible to grow rapidly and maintain your culture? And if so, how have you guys managed it?
Hessie, I feel like you're doing quite a lot of rapid growth right now.
So for some context here, when I joined Starling in July 2016, there was about 20 to 30 people. We are now 120. So we've scaled quite rapidly. So this question is right up my alley. I'm currently doing a master's in HR, and that was basically the subject of my dissertation, was how do startups scale sustainably, successfully from a kind of people perspective. Because I think actually it's a really common fear. And when you're in a very founder-driven business or a very small business, it's easy to know everybody and kind of know how everyone works together. And there's a fear that if you're going to scale rapidly, something's going to go wrong and the culture's going to change and you're going to bring on the wrong people because you're in a rush, or like it's a very real fear. So as part of my dissertation research project, which is currently in for marking, so fingers crossed, but as part of that, I went out and I interviewed a whole bunch of people at technology businesses of different points of maturity. So I was focusing on this very much from a people perspective rather than a kind of like financial perspective. So I was looking at it in terms of kind of how mature your people processes are. What I found was very much that actually, yes, it is very much possible to scale in a sustainable way, but there has to be a conscious effort behind it. So what I found was very much that actually, as a general rule of thumb, generally businesses got to a kind of consolidating point. They got to about 100 people, like 100 to 150. That was the tipping point when they suddenly went, oh, we should probably bring in an HR person or a recruitment person or somebody who's going to actually be focusing on this stuff. But equally also what they were saying was then, I really wish we'd done this sooner. That was the main feedback that I was getting from the larger businesses, was actually we tried to split this among the founders for too long, like interviewing or recruitment, which is great because actually you really want your kind of business on the whole to be involved in that process. But I think it is really important to have somebody quite early on whose priority it is and who can think about how to actually do it. Because it's not just a case of kind of getting bums in seats and bodies through the door, but how are you what is so great about your company right now that you don't want to change? And yeah, it's going to be a very different vibe if you've got 20 people or if you've got 200 people. But what are the kind of really core things that you want to retain as that happens? So whatever that is, whether that's how kind of collaborative and open and supportive your culture is, or whatever that is for you, having somebody, and it doesn't have to formally be an HR or people operations type person, but just have somebody who is actually focusing on this. Quite often that'll fall into kind of an operations COO remit, but have somebody who is actually paying attention to this stuff. So how are we going to do this, and how are we going to actually build these development programs in, or whether it's a formal program or whether it's kind of an ethos of kind of continuous improvement from a people perspective. How do we build that in now so that we don't suddenly hit 100, 200 people and then go, we probably should have done this sooner. But that way you can also do it a lot more kind of organically. So it's not, I think we've all been in businesses where some like head office or HR has been like, oh, we're going to bring in this process, and no one's bought into it. If you can kind of start off a bit sooner and grow it like with the company, you can build something that's a lot more so in my experience, you can build something that's a lot more appropriate for your business, and is actually going to land, and people are going to believe in it a lot more than if you suddenly get to a point where you're like, oh, we need to bring something in now, and kind of dump it like on top of what already exists.
So I've been through a similar growth from 30 to 120. And I think one of the things that was really key is actually the starting point of the skills matrix that you're looking at, because it helps you to hire, it helps you to develop people. But I think it also helps you set really the measures by which you're going to say if someone's doing a good job or not. So part of what we went through when we scaled was to really look at making sure that everyone understood that it was part of their job to work on those sorts of things. So with recruitment, everyone did take part, so from juniors right through to seniors, because we really wanted to keep that culture and we were really clear on what that was. We made it very clear on why we were rewarding people around certain behaviours, and also with development, again, very behaviour focused, so people understood that, you know, they're the kind of things that we really value in this culture and really embedding it in that way. So yeah, I think the key things are you do have to make sure that that's consistent through what you're doing, and also just make sure that you're engaging your whole team. It's not something that one HR person can do, or one senior person in the team. It does need to be something that we're showing is important right the way through, and embedding that.
This is quite pertinent to us at the moment, because we just announced to our team yesterday that we're potentially growing by another 50 to 100 people. So we have, as mentioned, we've got about 80 engineers, around 120 in our tech business. The business itself over the last sort of 12 years has grown from some 20 to 30 to nearly 400 people. So I think people in the business are aware that change happens and that growth happens, but this is probably the biggest sort of one-off announcement we've made of how many engineers we're bringing on. For us, what we've tried to do is to kind of take people with us on that journey. So we know there are a number of things, a number of messages that the teams are going to want to hear, and a number of fears they have. The fears they're going to have is either that suddenly their team's going to double in size and they're going to have less impact on their product. The other problem is that there's just going to be hundreds of people they don't know, or work's going to get taken away from them. So we kind of tackle those messages head on. We kind of anticipate what the different people in that audience are going to want to hear. So the first thing we did was we talked to the teams about maintaining some of the things that are key to our philosophy. So, you know, we stole from Amazon that idea of two-pizza teams, that you can feed a team with two pizzas. So we let the teams know that any additions to our business will be new teams. They won't be just chucking a load of bodies in existing teams. We'll be building totally new teams. The counter to that is we don't want all of a sudden there to be, you know, 4 or 5 new teams that have never spoken to anybody else in another team. So we try to make sure that the foundations of those teams are based on existing CTMers, that we're kind of spreading that out. So there's a smattering of people joining teams rather than whole teams popping up out of nowhere. So we try to make sure that the foundations and the leadership of those teams is kind of built up of existing people. And then there's probably 1 or 2 key individuals that have been there for a long time, that have had a lot of autonomy and had a lot of influence because they've been part of small groups, that kind of want to feel they've still got that. So for those individuals, we kind of make sure that we let them see the growth opportunity for them. So they've been used to having this influence and this autonomy over those teams. We want those people to be part of shaping that culture in those new teams. So they don't just see it as something being taken away from them. They see it as an opportunity for them to help build it and what they were used to. So it's kind of just trying to work out the key messages that we think our engineers are going to have concerns over, and facing those head on.
I'm conscious of time. I think we have time for just one more question, and then this hand went up first, so I'm going to...
Hi. So it seems like a lot of you have gone through the process and evolved how you develop your tech talent. What I was going to ask was, if you were to advise someone, what was the biggest mistake you made along that process, along that journey? Because we have to go through that, so I would like to hear how maybe you got it wrong along the way so that we don't do it.
This feels like a negative note to finish on, so if you can put a positive spin on the end of your answer, that would be great. Who wants to take this? Anyone made some mistakes that they want to?
I was mentioning actually earlier, we made our first mistake with the first set of makers that we hired about 4 years ago. So we really hadn't thought about the onboarding, and we hadn't prepared properly at all. We were like, you know, they're really great people. Let's just throw them in the teams. And some people did really well. but we had one particular person that was, really talented, and we really did want to keep, and she just really felt completely unsupported, and that she didn't want to stay in that environment. So for us, the big lesson we learned was we had to prepare a lot more about that, and also make room for people that have different learning styles and need different support, because they're equally as talented, and we want to retain them all. So just making sure that we had that flexibility in our onboarding, so that people felt that was really key.
I think one of the things that we tried to stay away from was our previous skills matrix, which was kind of seen as a little bit of a box-ticking exercise by some individuals. When we really closely aligned certain skills and certain levels to certain roles, some people thought that their route to promotion was just, well, if I tick these boxes, promotion's nailed on. And what we found is when we evolved it, it wasn't just about the technical skills, it was about the maturity and behavioural stuff that went alongside it. So for us, it was a kind of a shot in the arm that we needed to change how we approached levelling, and kind of giving people more of that guidance rather than just sort of saying a junior does this, a senior does that. It was sort of a lot more nuanced than that, and we had to provide the skills and the support to make sure that they understood that.
I think that brings us to the close of our panel. So thank you very much to Gary, Francis, Hessie, David and Rory.